Tabletop Monsters and what I call Flex Encounters, all right? This workshop is going to be really great for the new DMs and the new players who you're interested in learning how to DM, and this is kind of a, like, I wouldn't say DM light. This is just a way for you to kind of like, with the anxieties, and like, here's a mellow way to do this, okay? And you can adjust things and you don't have to worry about things. And so this is what I call Flex Encounters. Anybody who's new to homebrew, this is kind of a homebrew thing as well. So you can kind of get introduced to it and get your feet wet in homebrewing. DMs who are looking for new ways to kind of like improv and do things on the fly, because that tends to be something that happens. Your players do something unexpected and you're like, what do I do? So this is going to help you with that. And then the longtime DMs, if there's any here, this is going to be a way that's going to help you save time planning your sessions. Literally, you're doing everything on the fly, so there's a lot less planning involved. All right, so my name is Amber Davies. I am the Chief Project Director at Dungeon Studios. We are a collective of creative individuals that basically want to put out creative content on various forms of social media that are tabletop-ish related. And I will explain what that means here. So I am the podcast host on Nerd News and the Game. Nerd News is our news formatted style show. Me and my co-host, we just talk about anything that we think is newsworthy related to nerdy topics. It's a fairly new show. We're still kind of developing it, so if you ever go back to our channel and watch it and have suggestions, feel free to leave those in comments. The Game is, we have the same two hosts, me and my same co-host, but we get into the crunchy mechanics of tabletop because we both have very long years of experience. I've been playing for over 20 years. I've been DMing for almost 10 years. And then I think he's been doing it longer. Between us, we have a lot of experience and we like to get into the crunchy. We have Fables from the Forgotten over here, which if you're into audio dramas, I highly suggest it. I am super, super proud of this product that we put out. It is, if anybody knows what Tales from the Crypt, that kind of ages ago, but Tales from the Crypt, but in a fantasy world. Each episode delves into the tale of a departed soul who finds themselves at the crossover, which is the tavern at the end of life. They tell their tale to the two internals that live in that tavern, and the internals will judge the fate of that soul. There's a lot of horror, there's a lot of mystery, sometimes there's a little bit of comedy. We have great voice actors, sound engineers, so I am so proud of it. I'm one of the main writers for that show, and I love it. We also have Deception Checks on our channel, which is our prank style show. We call real people real businesses, and we present them with situations that you would only find in a fantasy world, and we see how they react. And it's a lot of fun. And then down here is our tabletop cinema. We've only had one season of it. It's kind of like mystery science theater. We watch various movie clips or show clips, and then we just talk about like the tabletop mechanics that would have been needed for that thing to have happened. So it's a little bit fun. We're trying to revamp that show, so it's not on here right now, but hopefully a season 2 will be coming, and it's going to look a lot better than it did in season 1. And then for myself, because I am a writer, I have a short story published in a book that you can find pretty much everywhere books are sold, that you can find on my channel. You'll find all the QR codes to scan and find all the things that I'm involved in. But my own channel is pretty nerdy, and my channel is focused more on that space between writing and tabletop, which is world building. So you might have seen in the video reel that was played earlier, I do create like music videos that have very engaging images. So if you're writing a horror story, you can have these scary images, but you also have writing prompts on the pages that pop up every 30 or 40 seconds. So if you're waiting for inspiration, if you're stuck, you can look at the screen and there's a question that might kind of get your brain going, get you inspired. I also have interviews with other writers and DMs, and we discuss their world-building processes. So this is good for anybody who wants to get into writing, or DMs who are trying to create their own homebrew campaigns and want to understand how to world build, worlds, locations, people, societies, places, things like that. I have not been as active on my own social media, however, because I am focusing more on writing. I have some things coming out, so I am not as active there. However, I do plan to be very soon. All right, let's get into this. Tabletop monsters. All right. I I'm not even using the microphone. I'm assuming you all can hear me because I'm just a naturally a loud person. If you can't hear me, let me know. All right. So before we homebrew a monster, we should probably take a look at what already exists, right? This is kind of a great way to guide you on how to homebrew a monster. There are a lot of details on a monster stat block, and I'm just going to kind of show you. If you put it out in a list, look at all this stuff. This is a lot of stuff on a monster stat block, and as a DM, that's a lot for someone to remember, right? Now, the monster stat block, game designers are great. They have been able to figure out how to put all that on a monster stat block and make it easy for us to pick out all the information that we need quickly, all right? So, let's say that I'm planning a session. And the last time that I was with my players, they were talking about going on a ship. They were going to take a ship across the ocean to island, blah, blah. So I'm planning for my session and I decide, you know, it would be really fun? A dragon turtle. Why not? Have a dragon turtle attack their ship, or maybe they come across one and I can let them decide if they want to attack it. But that's what I planned for. Now we're in the session and they go, you know what? That city, that lava city over there that's in the jungle that has nothing to do with the ocean, we want to go over there instead. Or I want to go to this city over here, which is way far away from any ship or ocean. All right? They basically did something that I did not plan for, and now all of a sudden, I need to figure out what kind of encounter we're going to have, right? I mean, I could invent some reason for why this dragon turtle is in the jungle or in the city. I could invent some reason like that on the fly. I could. I could drop more heavy-handed hints that are like, oh, but there's a lot of treasure on this ship. You want to go on the ship? You know, I could do something like that. I could just not have an encounter. That, you know, I could just decide that this is going to be a role-play heavy session and they're going to go to the jungle and nothing's going to happen. I could quickly pour through the monster manual and try to find something that is equivalent to a dragon turtle that would work in a jungle or in a city or wherever they decide to go. All of those are fine options. However, that doesn't really play into my style of DMing. And I think maybe it doesn't play into everyone else's style of DMing as well. It could. But I don't like my players to have to sit and wait for me as I'm pouring through a manual trying to figure things out. I also am not the kind of person where a roleplay heavy session is fine, but personally I like to have at least one encounter. Something that happens, whether it's an encounter, a puzzle, or something, because that keeps my players engaged. Roleplay is fine and they love it, but if something happens, it keeps them just excited and moving and progressing through the adventure. So here's what I propose. I'm going to quickly homebrew a monster, all right? Now, homebrew here is probably a little bit of a stretch when I say the easiest thing to do is to reskin the dragon turtle that I had already planned. Right? If you don't know what reskinning means, basically I am taking the same stat block, everything, but instead of describing a dragon turtle, I'm just going to describe whatever else I want them to encounter. Since we're at second anime, let's just say they're going to encounter Godzilla, because they're going into a city and a Godzilla attack on a city sounds fantastic. So let's reskin the dragon turtle for Godzilla. All right? So let's take a look at those stats again. And what I would be looking for if I was going to quickly reskin this is I would say, okay, just so I don't mess up and describe something wrong to my players, is there anything here that would not work for Godzilla? I mean, aside from the name dragon turtle, I would just describe it as a bipedal lizard, monster, human, humongous, gargantuan. The AC, the hit points, everything looks fine. The stats all look fine. The fact that it has, dark vision, all these other stats on the left side look fine. The fact that it's amphibious, that's fine too. All the attacks, bite, claw, tail attack, all seems fine. I'm perfectly okay with keeping those. The steam breath is probably the easiest thing to change because it's Godzilla. So I would probably say instead that it's fire breath or lightning breath or stinky breath. Anything else that would work for this monster. I like stinky breath. I could even do like radiant damage if I thought, that played into the narrative well. So reskinning, I mean, adapting a stat block is far less time consuming than creating one from scratch. And so if you are caught in a pinch, super easy thing that you can do. If you didn't already know that you could do that, all right? You just want to make sure that you're not making any major changes to the stat block, because then you're now affecting the challenge rating, and now you're affecting how difficult this encounter might be, whether it's a lot easier or a lot harder. There we go. Okay, so what if Godzilla was not the monster I wanted to use? What if instead of going into the city or going into the jungle, they said, oh, there's this pirate cave over here. We want to go into this pirate cave. And it's a human-sized cave, right? Godzilla isn't going to work in there. Dragon Turtle isn't going to work in there because I have this map, and it's just a people-sized cave with people-sized tunnels. Maybe there's like a couple rooms or tunnels or caverns that are a little bit bigger, but then how do you explain that that monster is in there? How did it get in there, right? So what I would do in that case is I could quickly use my brain to imagine some kind of creature that's going to be in that cave. Some kind of cave monster, something that maybe looks pale or like a blobby thing. Or I could just quickly go to Google and quickly do a search, cave monster, and look at images. And maybe I would find an image that looks something like this. All right, this is something I literally found off Google, searching cave monster. All right, I liked it, so I decided to pick it. And basically, I could use the same stat block for the dragon turtle with maybe some other tweaks. Okay, before all we did was change the steam breath, but here I might make some other changes. For example, a tail attack, maybe I wouldn't want to have a tail attack. So instead of a tail attack, what other attacks could I describe for this creature? I might say a tentacle pops out of its chest, right? I'm still using the tail attack stats, but they don't know that. I'm just saying that something with bludgeoning damage is literally coming out of his chest, and I'm going to roll the hit, and then it does the damage just as outlined here. I could use a kick attack because this thing obviously has legs. I could consider that maybe it has a weapon. It's in a cave. Maybe it's got these gigantic claws, so it pulls giant boulders out of the wall and chucks them. And so I'm using the tail attack as a stat for it, but I'm describing it to my players as something else. You can get really creative with this just by even looking at an image. Like, what is this inspiring you that this creature can do? You can get even more creative. Instead of something that's melee related, like, a kick or a tentacle. Someone said stinky breath, right? I love that. That was very creative. What if it has like a scream attack? And if you read steam breath, oh no, I'm thinking of something else. You could give it something that does force damage. It's screaming. And then you can also add an extra layer to it, like it pushes, if it successfully hits it, pushes them 10 feet away. Or, they have to make some kind of a constitution saving throw, or maybe they're like deaf for a round, or, you can kind of add something to that, especially since, the tail attack is kind of one of the higher end of their attacks. You can kind of tweak it a little bit. So, again, this is all reskinning. This is not technically homebrewing, but you can use this in a pinch, and it makes things very easy when your players do something really unexpected. All right, so let's homebrew a monster together. All right, I went out to the internet and I grabbed 3 monster images. All right, so I'm going to use this crowd here. I want you all to tell me which monster you would like to homebrew together. Okay, we can do this. I see a lot of people holding up to. Let's start this. Okay, hold your hand up if you want one. Creature number 1, hold up your hand. Okay? Nobody wants one. I am intrigued. I thought that was going to be the interesting one because it's like an undead chicken. All right, number 2. Who wants to homebrew number 2? Yeah. All right, let's homebrew number 3. Okay, sorry folks, everybody wanted 2 more, but this will give you an idea of what you can do for homebrewing a monster. All right, this is great. So we're going to homebrew number 2. All right, again, now remember, now, if you have more time, we can homebrew this properly. When I say properly, like this isn't not properly. This is just, you're in a pinch, you're doing things quick, they're talking, they're role playing. You're like, keep talking about shopping over in that shop. Okay, I'm gonna quickly do this. So I went out to the internet. I found this image. I was like, this is super intriguing. All right. Do we have a name for the monster? We don't necessarily need a name for the monster because unless they ask, like, hey, monster, what's your name? They don't necessarily need to know. But if anybody has a really cool name for this monster, shout it out. You got a name?
Shadow of Dimensions.
Shadow of Dimensions. That's a really cool, epic name.
Skelenet.
Scale Mill?
Skelenet.
Scale.
It looks like a skeleton, but it's net.
Oh, I like it. Skelenet. Okay. Shadow Steel. All right, cool. Really cool names. Okay.
Sparkleplasm.
Sparkleplasm. I love these names. This is great. Syndrome. Ooh, that's pretty cool. It's kind of like a evil name. I like it. All right, we're gonna move on from names for now. All right, so the other thing that this picture isn't telling me is what size this creature is, right? There's nothing for scale, and not that I would even have to follow the picture, but this could be a tiny creature, like a fairy, right? They move super quick. They might be hard to hit. This could be a humanoid-sized creature, so that's medium. This could be large, maybe even huge. I mean, but remember, we're in a cave. This also makes sense for a cave, by the way. I love that there's a gem right there, and we're in a cave, so that's pretty cool, guys. All right, so for now, I'm just gonna say this monster's medium. It looks like a humanoid, maybe slightly bigger, like 7 feet tall. Okay, so I'm gonna say this is medium. What type of monster this is, I should probably know, because if you have created any characters for tabletop, you know some of them have special abilities against certain types of creatures. So they may do more damage if it's a construct. They may do more damage if it's a fiend or something like that. They may have special skills to fighting fiends. So we need to at least know what type of monster this is. This could be something, it looks undead, it looks like a construct or a fae or a fiend. For now, what I see hand raised, yeah. It's a giant elf?
Oh, a dead elf.
Oh, a dead elf, okay. I like this. Let's go with that. Okay, so we're gonna call that undead. It's an undead type. And maybe somebody buried this elf in a cave and it has morphed over time or some evil thing has happened to it and now it is this. I like that. All right. So we're gonna say it's medium size, it's undead. What was your name? The name for the monster again? Syndrome. Syndrome. We're gonna call it Syndrome for now. All right, so with regards to HP and armor class, I usually refer to the same stat block I had, just to keep things simple and straight because I have no time. There are tables that I will show you later to, if you want to vary the HP or the armor class. The attacks. All right, so the attacks are going to be really fun because I mean, we could use, what was it, the bite, the claw, the tail attack, but I mean, let's look at this picture. There's some really cool things that I think we could come up with what this creature can do. Are there any ideas for an attack for this creature? Yep.
The claw attack would have a grapple as well, with like a vine hanging off it.
All right, claw attack with a grapple. All right, I like that. Yeah, because there's kind of some weird, like, viney things happening there, or tendrils or something that's coming off of it. So I like the grapple.
Looking at the description, it says there's only a hollow void. What if it was able to manifest that void into like a ranged like power or like almost like the screaming thing, but instead like it sends out like a void attack or something like that?
Okay, so we can call it like the void attack, but it needs to have kind of a type. I'm sticking with D&D right now because that tends to be the major thing that people know. But so say something like I'm sorry.
It could be a void summon.
Oh, are you saying voice or void?
Void.
Void.
Void, yeah, a void summon. That's true. It could summon maybe like a little minion, like a little crystal thing, or some kind of a shadow creature or something. So we can have that as an attack. I like that. They would maybe see the gem in the chest glow, and then something like glows 10 feet away, and now we've got this little mini crystal creature. Yes.
I don't know if D&D has an equivalent of Pathfinder's Rake attack.
Wake attack.
Rake.
Rake.
R-A-K.
Okay.
But basically something where if it does hit with the claw and grab, then as a bonus action it can bring up those feet and claw with the feet.
Ooh, yes, I like that. Okay. One more. I feel like you in the back with blue.
Maybe like a spear attack and also like a bullet to that thing.
Yes. Okay. So you can do something that looks or appears menacing, get descriptive with the way that it looks and then the effect is that anybody within a certain range, they have to roll a save and then maybe they are now frightened and have to move away. Now, on the right, I've also included a special attack because again, we were fighting a dragon turtle that had 3 attacks and a special recharge attack. So with recharge, it was like you roll a 5 or 6, you get your steam breath back. We don't necessarily have to have a recharge attack. It could be something else. It could be, we were talking about conditions affecting the party. It could be something that they can do once per day, twice per day, 3 times per day. As long as it's like a limited attack, that's like a special, maybe it does something a little bit more. We can add that. So it sounds like everybody's got some really great ideas. I'll go ahead and call on you because I see you've been trying to raise your hand. What's up?
Right. Then
Okay. So you guys all have really great ideas on different attacks. And you're just kind of quickly coming up with these, jot them down. Okay, so we had a claw attack. We had, there was something that was a fear attack. I liked the summon, we're gonna summon little like crystal minions or shadow minions. I love that, especially again, in a cave. Could you imagine like the gems that people are mining like come to life and now you have these little Pillsbury Doughboy things just like menacing everybody anyway. Okay. So we've come up with the attacks, which is great. Yep, okay, I wanted to make sure I finished all the things there. Oh, no, we did that, okay. So let's talk about what the damage is that your monster can do, all right? There is a table in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It's called Monster Statistics, that's hard to say, Monster Statistics, by challenge rating. All right, so using this table as a guide, I just quickly clipped out, our dragon turtle was a CR 17, so I quickly clipped that up. Here's what CR 17 looks like. You get a proficiency bonus plus 6. Armor class is 19. Your hit points are somewhere between 311 and 325. Your attack bonus is plus 10. Your damage per round, that's the one that's the most important right now. Damage per round, it says 105 to 110. And then you have your save DC with this 19. All right, so let's talk about this damage per round. So what that means is when it is your monster's turn, it can do 105 to 110 damage for 1 attack, or you could split it up. We're talking about 3 attacks plus a special attack, right? So let's consider that if we did that, 3 attacks, that means we're doing roughly 37 points of damage each attack for 3 attacks, okay? That sounds fine and all, but that means that my claw attack, my fear attack, and my summon crystal attack, they all do the same amounts of damage. Which, I mean, again, if you're in a pinch, you can totally do it. But I would prefer to maybe make this like tiered damage where we have like a low level attack, and a medium attack, and a high attack. So that our claw attack can be like the low level. It does 15% of this damage that we can do per round. The medium attack, I would say, would probably be like, the summon crystal attack. Let's make that the medium attack, all right? Because now you've got these little guys and they're all, together gonna do 38 points of damage. And then the high attack, let's say that's the fear attack. It's gonna scream and it's gonna hurt them like psychically, but also maybe impart fear, right? So by giving this kind of a tiered stack of damage, they're gonna feel less like they're not gonna catch on as quickly to what you're doing. Instead of saying, oh, this does 37 points of damage, and also that does 37 points of damage. Now you can kind of tier this up, and it makes a little bit more sense in their heads why the claw attack does less than maybe this monster attack this high attack that they've done. If you want to vary it even further and make it look even more real, you can convert this now to dice rolls. All right, this gets a little tricky because there's no real exact science for this. It's kind of more of a what's your preference? Do you like potato chips or tortilla chips? So for example, this could be, let's go with this 17 damage here, all right? That could be like 2d8, okay? That means you're getting a max of 16 points. That's the highest you can roll on 2d8. And then add a plus something, your damage modifier. So 2d8 plus 5, 2d8 plus 2, something that makes you feel like you can kind of get your average roll to maybe be like close to 17, all right? 3d6 gets you a max roll of 18, and then you can tweak that. 44 gets you a max roll of 16, and then you can tweak that. So I think personally, I kind of like being in the middle. I like 3d6s. People have a lot of d6s. It makes it a little bit easier. So I would say 3d6 plus 5. And I just did like a quick Google, like roll 3d6 and see what happens. This is what we got. So I'm happy with that. So if I wanted to convert this to dice rolls, this is what I would do. Another option is to use what's called the damage severity by level table. And you can just go out to Google and search this, and this is the table that you will find. It has various different formats. But essentially, it's breaking the damage down into D10 rolls. And it's giving you a table. So if you have 4, this is based on a group of 4 players. If I have 4 17th level characters, that bottom row, and I want this to be a dangerous encounter, I'm rolling 8d10 of damage per round. That sounds like a lot. Okay, but when you do the math, that's like an average of 99 points of damage, which is about in line with what that other table said, which is like 105 to 110. So this is, I think, a little bit easier if you're just going to have a single attack, because you can just do the 18d10 and be done with it instead of breaking it down into your head like this much damage, I'm going to allot this much to here and this much to here and this much to here. But again, in a pinch, this works. I would suggest you print this out, find it on Google, print it, and put it on your DM screen if you don't already have it. Okay, so if all that math is scary to you, or you just want a little bit more flexibility, you can literally take everything I just said in the first half of this and throw it away if you want. You keep it or you can throw it away. But flexing the encounters, which is what I call this, is kind of my method for being able to adjust the encounter on the fly. If you feel like it's too hard, like you're about to put your players through a TPK, you can do this on the fly in the middle of the battle. Or if you realize like, oh man, this is supposed to be a dangerous encounter and they're just like one-shotting it and it's dead. Like, I want this to be more difficult. You can do the same. This method works both ways, all right? So you could homebrew a monster, you could reskin a monster, you can do all that, or you can do this, or a combination of both. So, let's get into flexing your encounters. All right. I'm pretty sure everyone here knows what a TPK is. Is there anyone here who does not know what a TPK is? Okay, TPK stands for Total Party Kill. So, if you are a DM and you've got your 4 players and you're like, I'm going to throw a dragon turtle at 4 level 6 characters, they're probably going to die. And it'll be a TPK. That's what it's called. So, I know a lot of DMs that try to avoid this, always and forever, all right? I'm here to tell you, I think TPKs are okay. This is my opinion, you don't have to share it, but I think TPKs are okay because some of the greatest gaming moments come out of TPKs, or even like near-death TPKs. Like you've got 4 party members, 3 are down, there's only 1 left, and he saves the day, or she saves the day. It's amazing, okay? So do not be afraid of TPKs, and with flex encounters, I think you can get yourself to get really close to a TPK and be able to pull it back so that they feel the stress, they feel the stakes, but you don't have to worry about everybody being really disappointed at the end that everybody died, all right? So why do TPKs happen? I was going to ask, but I already moved to the slide, and I don't know if everybody knows. But does anybody have any other theories or ideas or anything they want to say about why TPKs happen?
I screwed up.
You screwed up. Okay, meaning a DM, as a DM or as a player?
As a DM.
Okay, as a DM. Yes, you know what? You're right. That can happen. DMs can screw up. All right. Players have really bad rolls. Yes.
They don't know how to fight together.
They don't know how to fight together. This is great, yeah, and this is part of PC tactics. All right, so let's get to the point here. I think if you've ever tried to plan and look at the CR rating, I mean, it is really confusing to try to plan an encounter and think that you have everything balanced. You have to put a lot of faith into the system and the books and what they're telling you, and even then, it could all go wrong. Because when you're using the CR rating or any other type of planning, it's not taking into account your player's inventory, What if you are one of those DMs that have doled out a bunch of high magic items? Like, you kind of screw yourself a little bit when you do that, but you can have a lot of fun with it as well, right? People they want to live in fantasy and have a lot of high magic items. They don't take into account if they have health potions. They don't take into account if your players were dumb and did not rest before an encounter, and they are all tapped out on spells. It doesn't take into account if people don't play well together, or people don't like each other and they don't communicate, or they're hiding their resources. They have bad dice rolls. There's any number of things that can make an encounter go south. All right? So, let's walk through a scenario. I don't know who all can see this really well. This is basically a circus at night, a carnival at night, all right? And let's imagine we have 5 players and 4 are down, and we now have 1 person left, and you have a TPK that is imminent, all right? What would you do? I'm gonna have you hold it. I'm gonna have you hold it for a second. All right. Think about what you would do if you were running this scenario. What would you do to either prevent the TPK, or are you going to forge ahead? Because, and here's the thing, again, I don't want people to be afraid of TPKs. However, imagine that we are here in this, I don't know if you can see this is an orc character, right? What if it's his backstory or her backstory? And they're in the middle of figuring out who their parents are and why this griffin killed his mom or something. And like, you're in the middle of an important backstory moment. Do you really want everybody to die in that moment? Probably not. You can do it like if your players did something stupid and you're like, ha, I'm gonna show you. Yeah, maybe a TPK is worthy in that moment. But if they're really in the middle of something important to them, it is gonna be really disheartening if you kill them all in the middle of this moment. So, here are some ideas for flexing this encounter, all right? Obviously, this is something that you may have learned or you already know, but it bears repeating, all right? Over-communicate hints and clues. There are a lot of DMs that are like, well, if they want to take an action to figure this out, they can, all right? But if a TPK is imminent, you could be a little more generous. If this is really loud, we can close those back doors. I'm sorry, guys. I just want to make sure everybody's able to hear me. But it's okay to over-communicate hints. Now, don't make them feel like gimmies, because your players will feel them, all right? So what you can do is kind of go through your players' backstories. Hey, Druid, I remember that when you were a child, you read a book before about unicorns, and you recall that they are immune to being harmed, okay? If that was part of their backstory, they're all about unicorns, give them that hint about the unicorn that they're fighting. Hey, Rogue, in your backstory, you used to have an air elemental in your parents' basement. So you know things about air elementals. Like, here, I'm going to give you this piece of information. Okay? If they don't have anything in their backstory, then you can at least use the party, whoever has the highest perception, to maybe notice something that's going to be helpful. Hey, that druid did that fire damage, and you noticed that fire damage didn't do as much as you thought. Or it could be, hey, you realize that this Zorn over here is not using eyesight at all to detect where you guys are. You realize this Zorn doesn't have eyes, or something to that effect. Use the player's highest perception to give them something that they can use, figure out clues to help them get through this encounter. And do this as soon as you notice things are going south. As soon as you notice. Because, the wheels are turning. They're going through their player sheet. They're thinking about spells. They're not necessarily thinking about these tactics. So you've got to give them some time. Relay that information. Give it around. See if anybody's doing anything. Maybe drop another hint. Okay. These are all about hints for things that are pre-existing in this encounter. However, you can also give them some hints for things that maybe you didn't have that's pre-existing here, but you're going to make it up to help them, okay? I had in one of my encounters, this was actually my husband, which is wild because he's a very new player, so I think that's maybe why he thinks outside of the box, because he's not, he hasn't been playing for years and knowing all these things. But he said, hey, does this guy have any old wounds on him or scars or something that looks like, if I hit that thing, it'll hurt more? And when I planned it, I was like, no, this guy's totally healthy. He's like the beefcake of this city. But you know what? That was a really good question. So I just kind of, I thought about it. And I was like, oh, he's kind of struggling. Sure. You know what? You notice that his right knee looks a little knobby and inflamed. So he starts focusing his attacks on that knee, and I'm going to let him do double damage because that is going to help him make it through this round without a TPK. So if they ask questions like that, definitely lean into it, but they might not even think to ask. So this is where if they're not picking up on the existing hints, make something up that will help them. You notice an old festering wound. You see pus coming out of this thing on the side of this monster. Like they're going to maybe go attack that. Give them double damage. Or make it the killing blow if it's close enough. Make it the killing blow. I would just make sure you're not removing any established abilities, all right? If you have already told them that their fire damage is not doing that much damage, don't then change it and go, oh, look, your fire damage is now doing double damage. Like, unless you have some narrative reason for that, don't do that because they will notice right away that you're doing a gimme. And they won't feel as much pride like they made it out of this situation alive, right? If it's not some kind of old festering wound, maybe they need potions. The healer is down. They don't have anything. So instead, you have them roll a perception check real quick, or just say, hey, you notice a crate over there with something like red shining out of it. Looks like maybe a potion, you know? Be generous with your hints because in that dire moment, they are literally thinking 5 million directions. So give them a potion. Or if it's not a healing potion, it could just be some random potion. That's always fun. Because then they're like, oh, wow, I can jump 50 feet in the air all of a sudden. Or wow, I can fly. Or, something that can help them. Or it could be an escape route. Last minute, I'm going to give you a perception check. By the way, you notice over here, you didn't see it before, but this bush is hiding a burrow, and if you climb under that, you can escape. Or environmental hazards or traps, which is going to lead into using the battle environment and surroundings. I mean, there's a lot of people who use theater of the mind, but I think more lately people have been using battle maps. So you already have a visual idea of what your battle map looks like, whether you're in a forest, whether you're in a volcano, a cave, what have you. Use that environment to help them, okay? So I would say something like, hey, you notice that where the monster is standing, there's like this hairline crack in the cliff, and if you potentially add more stress to it, that section of the cliff will fall. If they're in a volcano, that's great, then it falls into the lava. If you're in a cave, you could describe to them, hey, you notice every time you're attacking or every time the monster roars, that there's little bits of rocks and dust that are falling from the ceiling. And you feel like with a little more noise, you could get a collapse going. Think of whatever you can use in your environment to aid your player. And then you want to communicate, don't give it to them. You want to communicate the hint and give them a round to hopefully figure it out, and maybe they will tap into it. All right, that rewards them and makes them feel like they were smart enough to figure out whatever it is you were communicating to them. So these are just some examples. Again, if you're near ice, create an avalanche that covers the monster. That gives them a round to heal up, or to run away, or to maybe even do damage to the monster. If you're in the forest, a tree could fall on the monster. If you're in the plains, it's super wind is starting to pick up and you notice there's a tornado in the distance coming your way. So there's all kinds of things that you can get really creative with for the battle map to help you. The key again is to telegraph it in advance and give your players a chance to work those out. And then you could also have the monster or the enemy retreat, all right? Now, this gets a little bit tricky. You gotta kind of really think about the reasons why so that it feels, so that it doesn't feel like a gimme, right? If they're fighting against a beast or a monster, you can make some weird, you hear in the forest, that's a horrible sound. I am not a voice actor. That's why I'm a writer and not a voice actor. But they hear a sound in the forest, and it could be like, the monster hears its baby calling and goes, or it's a mating call, or you can have another creature show up and scare that monster off. Now, the new monster can't stay either, or else now your players are just fighting a monster with brand new HP. So it goes chasing off after the other monster. If they're fighting humanoids, Similar tactics. They hear a call off in the distance. It's their leader calling for a retreat, or it's one of their crew members calling for help. I fell in a trap, or use something like that. If you think that it will fit in the narrative, if you think that your players won't feel like it's a gimme, all right? If your enemy can communicate, what I highly suggest to you, if they retreat, though, is to really taunt your players. Because boy, do they take it personally. Boy, do they take it personally if your enemy's like, you are too weak for me, mortal. Come back to me when you're stronger because you're not even worth my time. The next time that they come across that guy, oh boy, do they want to kill him, all right? So taunt and tease your players. Even if it's a creature that can't necessarily communicate with words, it can communicate with body language. It can kind of like, imagine like, a gorilla kind of like puffing up on them and then like maybe like smacking them across the head like a pity slap and then taking off, I mean, they're going to take it personally. And that's what's great. If you make it personal, oh boy, does it stick. All right, so remember that. They can also negotiate a surrender if you have communication skills. And they may not want to surrender, but if you kind of lean into the hints, like, maybe there might be a chance for you to get out of this. If you surrender, you might end up in jail. But then now the next session, we're going to have like a escape from jail session, something to that effect. So you could lean into surrender and negotiation as well. These are all a little bit tricky, and I think this really depends on how well you know your players, so they don't feel like you're doing a gimme. You'd also create a distraction, all right? This goes back to when you have another creature show up and chasing off the creature. Instead, you could have a creature show up that is maybe, like for example, we had the griffin, and now we have a second griffin show up, and now the two griffins are fighting, all right? This basically takes the focus off of the party and the TPK and allows the monster to attack something else besides your party, all right? It is distracted. It's Godzilla and King Kong. King Kong shows up and now Godzilla's like, oh, forget the party, I wanna attack you. This gives the party a minute to think, to recollect, to plan, and or retreat or heal up. It gives them some breathing room. All right. So consider your options. Guards can show up. What you don't want to do is you don't want this thing that shows up to kill the monster for your party. You don't want that because then again it feels like the DMs just play toys by themselves and the party had nothing to do with it. Like it's not very fun for them. So you don't want to take care of the monster for them. You just want to give them a minute to think and regroup and either retreat or they will go back to attacking once they figure things out. All right, so now we're going to go back to our scenario. We've talked about all these ways that we can flex an encounter, all right? And we're talking about avoiding a TPK here. Almost everybody is down. Wow, I'm taking a lot of time and I only have an hour. I got to speed through this. So what are some ideas that we can do to adjust this encounter?
Tent gets set on fire.
The tent gets set on fire. I like that. That could be distracting to the griffin, like especially the griffin, if it's right next to the griffin. I like that.
It is currently between about 3 attractions, but it can't use its wings.
It can't use its weight. I like that. It's in tight quarters. Okay, now that might be hard to establish if you've already established that it's not in tight quarters, and then last minute you're like, oh. But what you could say is the wind picks up, and now some of the tents have moved. Okay, so you have to kind of figure out how to rationalize if you've already established that they have room. All right, I am going to, speed through this because I do have a little bit more and I want to have time for questions. But also, I have this on my channel. So if you scan these things, you will find the flex encounters portion of this discussion on my channel and you can revisit it without me speeding through it. But yes, these are some great ideas. All right, so now let's talk about flexing it in the other direction, right? You planned a Godzilla attack, a Godzilla encounter, and apparently you accidentally gave your players a lot of magic items, and they're like, oh, we're just gonna put up this wind wall, and this, and this, and this, and you're like, wow, my Godzilla is not doing hardly any damage, or now it's dancing in the corner because that bard, and like, you're stuck, and this encounter is not as hard as you would have liked it to be. Or, again, think of that character's backstory moment. Do you really want, like, the BBEG to show up, BBEG for this character's backstory to show up, and then he just like one-shots him. And you're like, wow, boy, what was I afraid of that guy for? Like you want there to be some stakes, all right? So this, as frustrating as it can be to your player, trust me, they love it. All right, so this is what I call the easiest way to flex your encounter up, right? People have probably said this in various forms, but you can add more enemies, or you can increase the HP. So let's say we already said it was 300 HP. They've already blown through 250 HP in that first round. Whew, in the next hit, my monster's going to be down. I can just keep adding HP until I feel like narratively, now this is a good time for the creature to go down. You can do that. Again, this is what I call my decent option, my decent fix. You can add more enemies. A second Godzilla appears, and a third one, until I feel like the encounter has been moderately difficult enough if my players have had a good time. The great thing about this is you don't need necessarily any extra minis or different minis. You've got a Godzilla. Once they down him, you pull Godzilla back up and you put him on the table in a different spot, and boom, this is the second Godzilla. Like, you don't need extra minis. You can decide to do this mid-encounter. It's fine. It can get boring though, especially when you do this often. Your players will pick up on it. They'll just feel like it's a sack of hit points to slog through. It's not fun. It's not engaging. So what can you do to make it better? I would say if you're going to add more enemies, you add a different type of enemy. All right, if they are fighting something that is on the ground and is maybe, let's just say it's on the ground. It's a giant boar. Add flying creatures, because now that battle space becomes 3D instead of 2D. They have to think about height and where things are in relation to them up instead of just out. All right. If they're fighting something big, add a bunch of little minions so that, you can kind of take up more room in the battle map. They have to think about where they are and what they're next to. If they're fighting something that's melee related, add some things with magic or spells, because this forces your party to think more strategically about their resources and their environment. It's not just the same thing over and over again at every corner of the battle map. All right. So this is a better option. This is what I think would be the best option. Again, if we're talking about adding more enemies. You're adding enemies of a different type that also inflict conditions. I think people, or new DMs anyway, I think do forget a lot about using conditions against your enemy, or your players are kind of your enemies, but against your players. Because that is just another layer of considerations for them. If they have to worry about getting blinded, if they have to worry about getting poisoned or stunned, while also considering the fact that there's something flying and something on the ground or something big and a bunch of little things, now they also have to worry about getting paralyzed. So it makes them really think and use like every part of their character sheet. So it makes them a little bit more engaged. Yes?
Would it also be engaging if you were to change the terrain a little bit? Like cast an illusion or maybe some form of teleport to a different area, like a maze you now have to work through against that enemy.
Okay, I'm gonna hold on to that for a second because I have something very similar. Yes. Okay, so you've added more enemies or not. You could also enhance your enemy's abilities. All right. So what I mean by this is you've already had your enemy do a bite attack and a claw attack. Perhaps this enemy has a tail, this monster has a tail. We just haven't necessarily relayed it yet, but maybe we've described it, and so we know that it has a tail. Well, now let that tail do an attack. All right. Now we could go back to homebrew monsters and how much damage does this tail attack do, but just for simple math in the moment, I would say the bite attack does this much damage, or the claw attack does this much damage. The tail attack does the same thing. I'm just adding an extra attack. All right. Don't let your extra attack do 10d10 damage. Like, this tail is massive, so it does 10d10 damage. Okay, unless you can narratively explain this and make it make sense for everyone, don't just make it a super powerful attack. All right. I would also say what's really fun to give your monster is invisibility. Because the second that monster goes invisible, they're like, what do we do? It's still here. they're gonna have to hold their attack, they're gonna get strategic, or they get a minute to heal up or what have you. But again, going invisible, all of a sudden they're like, whoa, okay, and they have to think about this. You can give your monster some healing and regeneration abilities. You can give them some kind of a magical ability. Again, I need to watch my time. Just make sure that when you're doing this, you're kind of relaying a little bit. Again, you want it to make sense. You don't want it to feel like a Deus Ex Machina, like, all of a sudden my monster grows a tail and now it's going to attack you. Like, you need to make sure you've communicated already that it has a tail. Or you can communicate right before it goes invisible. You see its scales shimmering, and then the next round, it goes invisible. That makes sense to your players instead of pulling it out of your back pocket right away. Ooh. Oh yeah, sorry, more on this. Okay, you can give them additional resistances to damage types. Now again, if they've attacked it with fire and you said, well, fire doesn't do that much damage, all right? Or sorry, if you say that it's done double damage, then you don't want to go the reverse and say it now does no damage, okay? So don't go back on anything you've already established, but you can relay some of these again. What's the enemy that we had with the gem? You see the gem glowing. Nothing has happened right away, but then in the next round, all of a sudden that monster's AC goes up by 2. Or now it has like an anti-magic field around it. Or whatever else you want to give it that amps the difficulty up, but you give them a round after you've described something, and that makes sense to them. Because they're all wondering, like, what's about to happen? Then something happens. It all makes sense. You can improve your enemy's tactics, all right? This only works if they're fighting like beasts, right? They don't expect like a wild boar to understand that the mage is squishy, so let's go after the mage. But if you have a bunch of wild boars and one of the wild boars looks different, I don't know how you want to describe it. It has mechanical bits on it. It's missing an eyeball. Its fur is purple. Whatever you want to describe, but that one that looks different, if it has different abilities and it's smarter and it knows to go after the mage, as long as you've described it as different, that makes sense to your players. They're like, oh, you don't have to know why it's different yet. That'll come in the next session when they go down the rabbit hole of why is this boar purple? Let's go look at the weird mage's laboratory. You know, like you can make that up later. All right. You know what? I somehow took that slide out. I'm so sorry. Because you mentioned about using the environment or changing the environment. The way that we use the environment to help our players, we can also use it against our players. All right. And maybe that's a little bit here of like giving yourself layer actions, but consider where they're at. That lava that the monster fell in when we were trying to avoid the TPK, well now that lava can spurt up and everybody has to do dexterity saving throws or take fire damage. All right, so you can use the terrain to help amp the difficulty up. The avalanche that was going to bury our monster if we were avoiding a TPK, now it creates difficult terrain and everybody's buried in snow. You know, you have to make some saving throws, but oops, you're buried in snow and now you have to take a round to get out of the snow. Fog, you can use fog. Fog rolls in and obscures everyone's sight. There could be magical effects, the anti-magic fields, what have you. But think about the terrain that they're in. If they're in a jungle, use vines against them, and now the vines are attacking. But you can do all this to amp the difficulty up. All right, so the whole purpose, again, of my flex encounters is so that you don't have to plan. You can do this in the middle of the encounter. You can kind of gauge where your players are at. Things are getting a little too difficult, maybe we need to bring this down. Things are a little too easy, let's bring this up. And you can choose to do this whenever you need to, so you don't have to plan in advance. However, if your players are talking about going on the ship and, going on the ocean, I can already think in advance, what are some things that are ocean related that I can use to bring the difficulty up or down? I can already think about that in advance, so I have it in my back pocket instead of frantically thinking about it in the middle of the encounter. I can already kind of plan for that. So you can jot a few things down. Also, I want to make a special note because I did get some comments on the video that I put out for this. People are like, oh, this feels a little hand-wavy. And yes, it can. If you use it too often, if you use it all the time, this is really meant, again, to avoid the TPK when you need to avoid the TPK. And to bring the stakes up when you think, man, this is really too easy and I don't want this particular encounter to be that easy. I want this to be hard for them because we're in the character's backstory. It's important for them. This BBEG should be hard. It shouldn't be easy. So take that with a grain of salt, but those are my methods here, my flex encounter methods. So I hope we have enough time for some questions. I'm so sorry that took a little bit longer than I expected. Are there any questions? Feel free.
As just a very, very baby beginner player, this has been actually really helpful for me to think about creatively, like how to roleplay and kind of what actions I should be thinking of creatively for just like in just both roleplay as well as encounters. So this has been super awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love that from a player's perspective.
What about time?
What about time? What do you mean?
Time, like, what about flexing the encounter when you're on a budget for time?
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
What about flexing the encounter when you're on a budget for time?
Like-
Flexing the encounter when you're on a budget for time.
Like the
Like
game,
time,
the game
like 30 minutes to 45 minutes?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. That you could definitely flex the encounter. I have done that. You know what? That's a great point now that I think about it. Because I have players where the game has to end at 6 p.m. on the dot, they are out the door. And so I do think about that. They've spent a lot of time role playing. There are some things you can do to kind of speed things along if they're like taking their sweet time getting to the ship. You know, all of a sudden I could maybe like, you see somebody run past you and they run onto a ship. And even though that person is not important, it's intriguing enough that they're like, wait, why did they go on the ship all of a sudden? We should get to the ship. You know, so there's some things you can do to kind of speed up the role-playing part of it. But if you don't, and they get into the encounter, you could choose, if it's not an important moment, I would just suggest if it's not an important moment for someone's backstory, you can use the flex encounter methodology to make the encounter a little bit easier so that they get through it in a shorter amount of rounds. Is that kind of, did that answer what you?
Sure, right.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
kind of more of a suggestion, but for the Griffin with the TPK and the backstory, you could also have the Griffin stop for a moment to explain why he killed the horse. You're that kid of those people who stole my egg,
Yeah.
and it can just and give the party a round or two to stabilize, come back, and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that I think a lot of people, I would say this, I'm a lot of people. I forget sometimes that my enemies can communicate. Even if they can't communicate with words, you can find ways to get the monster to communicate their motivations or, what they're about or what they want. Or maybe they're just malevolent and they don't care. But you can get your monsters to communicate things like that in actions or in words. Any other questions? Yes.
Also, the monster information, and potentially back then, follow the party for a little while, and then surprise something.
You can do that, actually. That's a great idea. As long as it makes sense for that monster, right? Like if they're fighting a wild boar, and again, we're talking about like beast tactics and would they be smart enough to do something like that, then, you have to be the gauge of that. But if it's like a humanoid, yes, definitely you could do something like that, or a monster that's smart enough to go, oh, I'm going to retreat for now, or I'm going to pretend to die, and then they'll leave, and then now you can start seeding in hints of like you're being followed, and oh, that track looks familiar, you've seen that track before, or feather, you've seen that feather before, whatever it is. Yes, I like that idea. That's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah, anytime they have an encounter with an enemy that leaves and then eventually comes back, like I said, boy, they take that so personal that they didn't kill them the first time around, and it is so satisfying to the DM and the player when you do that. So, all right, I will be around and I'll be walking around, but if you like this, I wanted to, again, point out I have QR codes for the channels that I'm involved in. You can also scan that if that comes up clear enough. I have a couple of these on my channel. Some of them are not, but they will be soon. The Flex Encounters is definitely on my channel. The TikTok Monsters is not yet. Yay! Okay, so I had asked before we started, we weren't this full here, but I would like to take a picture to put on my social media to share with everyone. If there is anyone who does not want to be in this picture, feel free to either move to the outskirts or, leave the room.